Was Golitsyn right, or was Nosenko? For decades, the CIA struggled with this question. Both men had supporters and skeptics. Both sides presented evidence. Golitsyn had exposed real agents. He had given clues about the Cambridge Five. Some of what he said was confirmed. But he also developed increasingly wild theories. The Sino-Soviet split was fake. Social democrats in Western Europe were Soviet agents. Conspiracies were everywhere. Nosenko's information was also confirmed. What he said was consistent. He did not contradict himself under repeated interrogation. Eventually, in the 1980s, the CIA officially cleared Nosenko. He was a genuine defector. Golitsyn had provided false information. But Golitsyn had directed the CIA for years. The paranoia policy had sabotaged real operations. Innocent people had been punished. In the war between two defectors, who won? Perhaps no one. Perhaps only the KGB won, by dividing its enemy from within. This is the story of how two Soviet defectors drove the CIA to madness. How the search for truth became an obsession that destroyed careers and lives. And how the Cold War's greatest intelligence battle was fought not between nations, but inside one agency's walls. Anatoli Golitsyn arrived in December 1961. He was a major in the KGB's first chief directorate, responsible for foreign intelligence operations. He had worked in the strategic planning section, giving him broad knowledge of Soviet intelligence activities across the globe. Golitsyn's defection was significant. He was one of the highest-ranking KGB officers ever to cross to the West. His knowledge was genuine, his access had been real, and his information was immediately valuable. He revealed the existence of a Soviet spy ring in France that reached into the highest levels of government. He provided clues that helped identify members of the Cambridge Five spy network in Britain. He exposed KGB operations across Europe. The CIA was delighted. Golitsyn was the real thing. His information led to arrests, expulsions, and the disruption of Soviet intelligence networks. But Golitsyn brought something else with him, a theory, a warning, a prophecy of doom. The KGB, he said, had penetrated Western intelligence at the highest levels. There were moles everywhere, in the CIA, in MI6, in French intelligence, in German intelligence. The entire Western alliance was compromised, and this was just the beginning. Golitsyn described a Soviet master plan of breathtaking ambition. According to him, the KGB had developed a strategy to deceive the West on a massive scale. They would send false defectors to spread disinformation. They would stage fake splits and conflicts to confuse Western analysts. They would manipulate Western perceptions of Soviet intentions. The Sino-Soviet split? It was theater. China and the Soviet Union were secretly coordinating their policies while pretending to be enemies. The purpose was to confuse the West and create diplomatic opportunities. Future defectors from the KGB? They would be plants, dispatched specifically to discredit Golitsyn and cover up the penetrations he had revealed. Any defector who contradicted Golitsyn was automatically suspect. This was a brilliant intellectual trap. If you believed Golitsyn, you could never trust anyone else. Every piece of contradictory evidence became proof of the conspiracy. Every denial confirmed the deception. James Jesus Angleton, the CIA's chief of counterintelligence, became Golitsyn's greatest believer. Angleton was brilliant, paranoid, and increasingly powerful. He saw in Golitsyn's theories a framework that explained everything. The hunt for Soviet moles inside the CIA began. It would consume the agency for the next decade. Yuri Nosenko appeared in Geneva in January 1964. He was a KGB officer who claimed he wanted to defect. He had information to trade, secrets about Soviet operations, details about KGB methods, and something even more explosive: Lee Harvey Oswald. Just 2 months earlier, President Kennedy had been assassinated in Dallas. The killer was Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine who had defected to the Soviet Union in 1959 and returned to America in 1962. The question burning in American minds was simple. Was the KGB involved in Kennedy's assassination? Nosenko claimed to have the answer. He said he had personally handled Oswald's file in Moscow. The KGB had found Oswald unstable and unreliable. They had refused to recruit him. They had no operational relationship with him whatsoever. Kennedy's assassination was not a Soviet plot. Oswald had acted alone. This was exactly what the American government wanted to hear. If the Soviets had killed Kennedy, the pressure for retaliation would be enormous. Nuclear war might become inevitable. Nosenko's information diffused the most dangerous aspect of the assassination. But Golitsyn had warned this would happen. A false defector would come. He would carry a message designed to deceive. He would distract from the real penetrations. To Angleton, Nosenko was exactly what Golitsyn had predicted. The CIA did not know what to do with Nosenko. If he was genuine, he was an invaluable source. His information about KGB operations, recruitment methods, and organizational structure could advance American intelligence for years. If he was a plant, believing him could be catastrophic. The disinformation he carried might lead the CIA in exactly the wrong directions. The real moles might escape while the agency chased phantoms. Angleton pushed for harsh measures. Nosenko must be broken. His story must be tested to destruction. Only through extreme interrogation could the truth be revealed. In April 1964, Nosenko was taken to a specially constructed facility. It was essentially a prison built on CIA property, designed for a single prisoner. For the next 3 years, Nosenko lived in isolation. His cell was small. He had no contact with the outside world. He was interrogated repeatedly, sometimes for days at a time. The CIA used techniques that bordered on torture: sleep deprivation, sensory isolation, psychological manipulation. At one point, they administered LSD during an interrogation session. Through it all, Nosenko maintained his story. He was genuine. He had defected voluntarily. His information was true. His interrogators could not break him, but they could not bring themselves to believe him either. The Golitsyn-Nosenko affair split the CIA down the middle. On one side were Angleton and his supporters. They believed Golitsyn's master plan theory. They saw Nosenko as a KGB provocation. They conducted the mole hunt with increasing intensity. On the other side were officers who found Angleton's paranoia destructive. They pointed out that Nosenko's information consistently checked out. They argued that the endless mole hunt was paralyzing the agency. The human cost was terrible. Dozens of CIA officers fell under suspicion. Some were investigated for years. Careers were destroyed based on circumstantial evidence and Golitsyn's accusations. One officer, a man who had served the agency loyally for decades, was suspected of being a Soviet mole based on the flimsiest evidence. He was denied promotions. He was watched constantly. He retired in disgrace. Only years later was he fully exonerated. The atmosphere in the CIA became poisonous. Officers were afraid to recruit Soviet sources because any source might be a provocation. Operations were canceled. Opportunities were missed. The agency that was supposed to be fighting the Cold War was instead fighting itself. As the years passed, Golitsyn's theories became increasingly extreme. He had started with genuine intelligence about KGB operations. That information was real and valuable. But his master plan theory grew beyond all reasonable bounds. According to Golitsyn, virtually every development in the communist world was staged for Western benefit. Prague Spring in 1968, a KGB operation to make the Soviet Union appear divided. The Polish Solidarity Movement, another deception. Glasnost and Perestroika, the ultimate strategic deception, designed to make the West drop its guard. Golitsyn predicted that the Soviet Union would stage a fake collapse. The Communist Party would pretend to give up power. But behind the scenes, the same forces would remain in control. The West would be fooled into dismantling its defenses. To anyone not caught in Angleton's web, these theories were absurd. The idea that the Soviet leadership would deliberately destroy its own system as part of an elaborate deception defied logic. But Angleton continued to believe, and as long as he ran counterintelligence, Golitsyn's influence persisted. James Angleton's reign ended in December 1974. The immediate cause was the revelation of CIA domestic spying operations. Angleton had been involved in programs that violated the agency's multiple charter by conducting surveillance on American citizens. But the deeper cause was the damage his mole hunt had done. Director William Colby had lost confidence in Angleton's judgment. The counterintelligence chief's paranoia had paralyzed Soviet operations. His obsession with Golitsyn's theories had led the agency into a wilderness of mirrors. Angleton was forced to resign. He left the agency bitter and convinced that his warnings had been ignored. He would spend the rest of his life insisting that the Soviets had penetrated the highest levels of American government. With Angleton gone, the CIA began to reassess the Nosenko case. A new investigation was launched. Fresh eyes examined the evidence. The conclusion was devastating. Nosenko was genuine. He had been telling the truth all along. In 1978, the CIA officially concluded that Yuri Nosenko was a legitimate defector. His information had consistently proven accurate. His story had remained consistent under years of interrogation. There was no evidence that he was a KGB plant. The agency formally apologized to Nosenko. He was given a settlement for his years of false imprisonment. He was hired as a consultant, using his knowledge to help train CIA officers about KGB methods. Nosenko lived the rest of his life in the United States, a free man. He died in 2008, still maintaining that he had told the truth from the beginning. But the vindication came at a terrible cost. Nosenko had spent over 3 years in solitary confinement. He had been subjected to treatment that, by any reasonable definition, constituted torture. His health had been damaged. His psychological scars never fully healed. And for what? Because one man's theories had been given more weight than evidence. Because paranoia had overwhelmed reason. The CIA had failed Nosenko, and in failing him, it had failed itself. Was Anatoli Golitsyn a genius or a madman? The answer is probably both. His initial intelligence was genuine, really had been a KGB major. He really had access to significant secrets. His early revelations about Soviet spy networks in the West were accurate and valuable. But something happened to Golitsyn after his defection. Whether it was pre-existing paranoia that flourished in his new environment, or whether the experience of defection itself triggered psychological changes, his theories became increasingly detached from reality. The master plan he described may have reflected real KGB aspirations. Soviet intelligence certainly conducted deception operations. They certainly tried to plant false defectors. They certainly sought to penetrate Western agencies. But Golitsyn inflated these real activities into an all-encompassing conspiracy that explained everything. When reality did not match his predictions, he simply expanded the conspiracy to account for the discrepancy. This made him unfalsifiable. No evidence could disprove his theories because any evidence could be reinterpreted as part of the deception. This is the hallmark of conspiratorial thinking, not intelligence analysis. Golitsyn died in 2008, the same year as Nosenko. He had outlived Angleton by more than 2 decades. To the end, he maintained that his warnings had been correct. What did the Golitsyn-Nosenko affair cost the United States? First, it cost years of paralyzed operations. The CIA's Soviet division was unable to function effectively while the mole hunt consumed its attention. Recruitment of Soviet sources slowed to a trickle. Intelligence collection suffered. Second, it cost the careers and lives of innocent officers. Dozens of people were investigated, harassed, and pushed out of the agency based on Golitsyn's accusations. The psychological damage to these individuals was immeasurable. Third, it cost the agency's credibility. The Nosenko case became a symbol of CIA dysfunction. When the truth emerged, it raised questions about the agency's judgment and its treatment of sources. Fourth, and, most ironically, it may have actually helped the Soviets. The KGB did have a mole inside the CIA. His name was Aldrich Ames. But while Angleton was chasing phantoms based on Golitsyn's theories, Ames went undetected for nearly a decade. The obsession with one conspiracy theory blinded the agency to an actual conspiracy happening right under its nose. What lessons does the Golitsyn-Nosenko affair teach? First, that certainty is the enemy of intelligence. The moment Angleton became certain that Golitsyn was right and Nosenko was wrong, he stopped analyzing and started believing. Intelligence work requires constant doubt, constant questioning, constant willingness to revise conclusions based on new evidence. Second, that institutional checks matter. Angleton was allowed to operate with minimal oversight for too long. His counterintelligence empire became a state within a state. No one could challenge his conclusions. This concentration of power enabled his worst excesses. Third, that conspiracy theories are seductive but dangerous. Golitsyn offered a framework that explained everything. That made it attractive, but should have made it suspect. Reality is messy. Clean explanations that account for all facts are usually wrong. Fourth, that the treatment of human beings matters. What the CIA did to Nosenko was wrong, regardless of whether he was genuine or not. The ends did not justify the means. The agency that claimed to defend Western values violated those values in its own facilities. The Cold War was a struggle of systems, but it was also a struggle of individuals. Golitsyn and Nosenko were both products of the Soviet system who chose to reject it. Both paid prices for that choice. One was believed too much. One was believed too little. And in the space between them, careers were ruined, lives were damaged, and the agency that should have known better lost its way. Two defectors came from the cold. Neither found what they were looking for, and the CIA learned that. Sometimes the greatest threats come not from enemies, but from the fear of enemies. That fear nearly destroyed